Candlelight trembled across the great hall of Ashwood Grange as the double doors groaned open to admit a ghost in mortal flesh. Lady Eilidh McLaren stood rigid at the foot of the sweeping stair, her emerald travelling gown still dusted with the moor's mist, green eyes wide with something far sharper than surprise. Before her knelt a man she had buried in her mind 3 years earlier. Taller perhaps, certainly leaner, his once immaculate black hair now streaked with salt and longer than fashion allowed. His sea-worn greatcoat hanging from shoulders that remembered command yet carried the stoop of prolonged humility. Roderick Strathmore, 9th Earl of Dunmere, lifted his head and spoke only 2 words, raw and cracked from disuse. "Eilidh, forgive." The single syllable hung between them like smoke from a dying fire. Every servant froze. The wind outside rattled the leaded panes as though the house itself held its breath. If this impossible reunion has already seized your heart, stay. Subscribe now, because the revelations that follow will unravel everything she thought safe, and everything he believed lost forever. The sea had taught Eilidh how to stand alone. It rolled endlessly against the cliffs below Duneraid House, unbothered by watchers, unashamed of its force. On mornings like this, when the wind braided salt into her hair and the gulls cried like restless spirits, Eilidh felt kinship with it. She had learned, over the past 3 years, to live as the tide did, advancing, retreating, surviving without permission. She tightened her cloak and scanned the lower fields. The crofters had already begun their work, bent figures moving with the quiet purpose of people who trusted her. That trust had not come easily. When her husband vanished, swallowed by war and rumor, the estate had teetered on the brink of collapse. Creditors circled. Neighbors whispered. Men who believed a woman incapable of command waited for her to fail. She hadn't. Eilidh had negotiated leases herself, learned the stubborn language of land and yield, memorized accounts by candlelight until numbers lost their power to frighten her. She had dismissed the old factor who spoke only to male ghosts and replaced him with someone who listened. Slowly, Duneraid steadied. Slowly she did too, which was why the sound of hooves on the gravel drive felt like an insult to the life she had rebuilt. She turned as the carriage crested the hill, black-lacquered, bearing a crest she knew too well. Her chest tightened, breath catching like a misfired lock. No, cannot be. The horses slowed. A footman dismounted. The carriage door opened. Eilidh did not move. 3 years ago, Roderick McCrae had ridden away beneath a sky much like this one, promising return before winter. He had kissed her knuckles as though she were something fragile, something to be preserved rather than trusted. Letters came at first, then rumors, then nothing. A battlefield in Flanders. A regiment scattered. A body never found. She had mourned him properly, buried him without a grave, learned to speak his name without breaking. And now, a tall figure stepped down from the carriage. The man was broader than she remembered. His dark hair cut shorter, streaked faintly with gray at the temples. His posture bore the marks of command and conflict, shoulders squared as if braced for impact. He wore civilian dress, but the war clung to him all the same, in the stillness of his movements, in the way his eyes swept the land with practiced caution. Roderick. The world narrowed to a single, impossible point. Her first instinct was fury. Hot, immediate, unwelcome. How dare he return? How dare he walk back into a life that had nearly crushed her beneath its absence? Her second instinct was fear, not of him but of herself, of the way her body remembered before her mind could intervene, of the ache that stirred, sharp and traitorous, behind her ribs. Roderick looked up and saw her. Whatever expression he expected, it was not the one she wore. Her face had settled into something composed, distant, almost cold. He hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, and in that pause she glimpsed uncertainty, perhaps even shame. "Eilidh," he said, her name roughened by disbelief. "You're here." A foolish thing to say, as if she might have vanished with him. She descended the steps slowly, refusing to rush, refusing to soften. "This is my home," she replied. "Where else would I be?" His mouth opened, then closed. He removed his hat, fingers tightening around the brim. "I sent word." "You sent silence," she corrected. "For 3 years." The footman shifted uncomfortably, clearly sensing he was witness to something not meant for servants' ears. Eilidh gestured sharply. "You may go. Mrs. Calder will see to the carriage." When they were alone, the wind filled the space between them, tugging at cloaks and unspoken truths. "I was captured," Roderick said at last. "Wounded. There were months I couldn't even write. By the time I escaped, the war had changed everything." "And me?" she asked quietly. "Did it change me too?" He looked at her then, really looked, at the lines of confidence etched where softness once lived, at the way she stood, feet planted, gaze level, not waiting, not hoping. "Yes," he admitted. "It did." Something in her chest loosened, just a fraction. Not forgiveness, never that easily, but acknowledgement. He saw her. Not the girl he'd left behind, but the woman who remained. They walked inside without ceremony. The great hall felt smaller with him in it, as though the past had reclaimed square footage. Memories lurked in corners. Laughter by the hearth, arguments whispered after midnight, plans made as if certainty were guaranteed. Roderick stopped near the window. "I didn't know if you were alive, and I didn't know if you were," she said. "But I had to live as though you weren't." The words trembled despite her resolve. There it was, the raw vulnerability she'd sworn never to show him. Startled them both. "I never meant to abandon you," he said, voice low. "Not Dunaraid, not our marriage." Eilidh folded her arms, not defensively, but to hold herself steady. "Intent does not erase consequence. This estate survived because I chose to survive with it. I will not surrender that because you've returned like a ghost demanding recognition." He flinched, not in anger, but in something like remorse. "I don't want to take anything from you." "Then understand this," she said, meeting his eyes without mercy or invitation. "You are a revenant in my life, Roderick. Unwelcome, unresolved, and bound by truths we have yet to speak. If you wish to stay, it will be on new terms. Mine." Silence stretched between them, heavy but honest. At last he nodded. "Then I will listen." Eilidh turned toward the window, the sea roaring below as it always had. The tide did not ask permission to return, but neither did it reclaim what had changed. And neither, she resolved, would he. Dunaraid House no longer slept. That was the first thing Eilidh noticed each morning as she crossed the threshold from her private chambers into the estate's beating heart. Once, the halls had echoed with emptiness. Fires left cold to save coin, doors shut to hide decay, servants dismissed until only ghosts seemed to linger. Now the house breathed. Footsteps moved with purpose. Voices carried softly along corridors. The scent of baking oat bread and peat smoke curled into the stone like a promise kept. Eilidh paused at the landing, hand resting on the banister polished smooth by generations. From here she could see nearly everything. Mrs. Elspeth Gow directing two maids with sharp efficiency below, a page darting toward the study with ledgers tucked under his arm, sunlight slanting through tall windows she'd fought to keep unboarded when winter storms threatened to shatter them. It had taken time, years of stubborn resolve and sleepless nights, but Duneraid had learned to live again. And so had she. Lady McCrae, came a familiar voice, steady and warm. "You're up early." Callum Innes stood at the base of the stairs, his weathered face split by a smile that carried equal parts respect and concern. He was no longer young, but his shoulders remained strong, his eyes keen. He had been steward under Eilidh's father-in-law, then Roderick, and when many expected him to leave after the laird disappeared, he stayed. "I find the house behaves better when I rise before it," Eilidh replied, descending the stairs. "Have the crofters finished marking the west field?" "Aye, and they'll be pleased when they hear you've approved the new grazing rota. You've earned their loyalty, my lady." She accepted the ledger he offered, fingers brushing parchment smudged with honest labor. "Loyalty isn't given," she said. "It's kept." Callum studied her for a moment, pride softening his features. "You've kept it well." They walked together toward the study, once a cold, shuttered room where dust had gathered thick enough to accuse the living. Now it held warmth, a crackling hearth, shelves restocked with account books and correspondence, a large table scarred with use rather than neglect. This room had been her battlefield. In the early months after Roderick vanished, Eilidh had sat alone at this very table, hands trembling as figures blurred before her eyes. The debts had seemed insurmountable then, old loans called in, trade agreements broken, repairs deferred for too long. Advisors from neighboring estates had come cloaked in sympathy, offering solutions that reeked of condescension. Sell land, dismiss tenants, marry again. She had done none of those things. Instead, she learned. She learned which fields produced best when rested rather than overworked. She learned which men spoke loudly but hid weakness in their numbers. She learned that listening, to crofters, to widows, to Mrs. Gow's sharp assessments of household waste, revealed more than any gentleman's counsel ever had. Mrs. Elspeth Gow entered the study as if summoned by thought alone, a tray balanced expertly in her hands. Her gray hair was pulled tight, her spine straight despite the years. She set down tea with brisk precision. "You'll want to eat, my lady," she said, not unkindly. "The council meets before noon, and arguing on an empty stomach leads only to foolish compromises." Eilidh smiled faintly. "You assume I would ever compromise foolishly." Mrs. Gow sniffed. "Even lions rest between hunts." That too had been earned. At first, the housekeeper had watched Eilidh with guarded skepticism, a young woman left in charge of a crumbling legacy. But when Eilidh had refused to dismiss kitchen staff, choosing instead to cut her own allowances, when she insisted wages be paid on time even as her own gowns wore thin, when she demanded transparency rather than silence, Mrs. Gow had shifted from observer to ally. Now the household ran like a well-tuned instrument. "Mrs. Calder reports the north wing roof held through last night's rain," Mrs. Gow continued. "No leaks." "Good," Eilidh said, relief threading her voice. Repairs had been a gamble, expensive, risky, but neglect would have cost more in the end. "And the schoolroom?" "Finished," Callum said. "The children start lessons next week. You should have seen their faces when they realized it was truly happening." Eilidh closed her eyes briefly. That more than profit or prestige had been the victory. Education meant choice. Choice meant freedom from the same traps that had ensnared generations before. As they spoke, her gaze drifted toward the window, and beyond it to the drive. A black carriage stood there now. Roderick's. Her chest tightened, unbidden. Pride swelled first. Let him see this, she thought. Let him see what grew in the space he left behind. The restored fences. The fuller barns. The people who greeted her not out of obligation, but trust. But beneath that pride lay fear, coiled and sharp, because everything she had built rested on fragile ground. Legally, Duneраid still bore his name. Every improvement she'd made, every reform she'd fought for, could be undone with a signature, with a command spoken in a voice that once held unquestioned authority. Callum followed her gaze and stiffened. He's touring the grounds. So I see. He's asking questions. Let him, she said, though her fingers curled at her side. Knowledge is not ownership. Callum hesitated. You know, some men won't see it that way. I'm painfully aware. After they parted, Eilidh walked alone through the house, letting her steps fall where memory and intent collided. She passed the old withdrawing room, now converted into a communal space for meetings. The once neglected courtyard, where herbs flourished under careful tending. The servants' hall, expanded warmer, filled with laughter during meals. Each change bore her imprint, and yet the presence of the man who once ruled this place threatened to recast it all as temporary. In the afternoon, she met Roderick in the west field. He stood with Callum near the new boundary markers, listening intently as crofters explained the rotational system she'd designed. He did not interrupt, did not command. When one man spoke hesitantly, Roderick nodded, encouraging rather than dismissing. It unsettled her. This was your doing, he said when he saw her approach. Not accusation, observation, all of it. Yes. You've turned decline into stability, and stability into hope, she added coolly. He inclined his head. You've done what I never thought to do. The words struck harder than she expected. Because you never had to, she replied. You inherited certainty. I inherited absence. They stood there, the land stretching between them, no longer barren, no longer broken. I won't dismantle what you've built, he said quietly. She looked at him then, searching for the familiar arrogance she'd once known. It was not there. Only something like humility or regret. Intent, she said softly, is not enough. I know. As the sun dipped low, Eilidh returned to the house, her steps measured, her mind racing. Duneраid thrived because she had learned to fight without spectacle, to lead without permission. But now the past had returned, wearing the face of a man she once loved. And for the first time since she rebuilt her world, she feared not failure but erasure. Because losing Duneраid now would not just cost her land. It would cost her proof that she was ever capable of standing alone. The study had been prepared for war. Eilidh stood alone at the hearth, its fire crackling low and steady, casting amber light across shelves she herself had restocked and a desk she had refinished with her own hands when funds were thin. This room no longer belonged to memory, it belonged to resolve. Every ledger, every chair placed with intention, bore silent witness to the years she had survived without him. When the knock came, it was measured, controlled. Enter, she said, without turning. Roderick McCrae stepped inside and closed the door behind him. The sound echoed heavier than it should have. He paused, as though uncertain where to stand. his gaze traveling the room with an expression she could not immediately name. Not ownership, not disdain, recognition. "You changed it," he said quietly. "I had to," Eilidh replied. "The old version couldn't sustain what came after." She turned then, meeting his eyes across the space that once defined their marriage. He looked older, lines etched by time and weather, his shoulders bearing a weight she hadn't placed there herself. Gone was the careless confidence of the laird who believed permanence was his birthright. This man looked careful. They stood in silence, a decade of unspoken words pressing between them. "I asked for this meeting," he began, his voice low, deliberate. "Not as laird, not as—" He stopped, exhaled. "But as the man who left." Eilidh folded her arms. "Then speak as one." Roderick nodded once, as if bracing himself. "I wronged you." The words were simple, too simple. She waited. "When I disappeared, I told myself it was necessity," he continued. "Political entanglements, threats I couldn't explain without endangering you. I convinced myself silence was protection." His jaw tightened. It was cowardice. Her breath caught despite herself. Not because she believed him, belief was too fragile for that, but because he had named the wound accurately. Cowardice. Not fate. Not honor. Choice. "You left me," she said, her voice steady by discipline alone. "You left this house to rot. You left people who depended on you. You left without a word." "I know." "No," she corrected sharply. "You know now." Knowing then would have changed everything. Roderick met her gaze, and for the first time since his return, something flickered, pain, raw and unguarded. "I wake every morning with that truth," he said. "It has not grown easier." She looked away, forcing herself not to soften. Old instincts stirred too quickly, too dangerously. Sympathy was a luxury she had trained herself to live without. "Why are you here?" she asked. He took a step forward, then stopped, respecting the invisible boundary she'd drawn. "Because apology without accountability is meaningless. And because I see what you've built, and I know words alone cannot earn my place within it." That earned him her attention. "You expect forgiveness?" she asked. "No," he shook his head. "I expect scrutiny." The fire snapped. Somewhere in the house, a door closed softly. Life went on, indifferent to the reckoning unfolding within these walls. "You want proof," he said. "Tell me what form it takes." Her pulse quickened, not with anger, but with wary curiosity. She had rehearsed accusations, defenses, even dismissal. She had not prepared for this. A man placing his standing in her hands. "You no longer dictate terms," she said slowly. "Not to me. Not to this estate. I understand." "Then understand this," she continued, stepping closer, her voice low but unyielding. "You don't reclaim Dunedain by right of blood or marriage. You earn your place through action, transparency, consistency." He nodded. "Name them." She studied him, really studied him, searching for the impatience she once knew, the flash of entitlement. It did not surface. "First," she said, "you will make no unilateral decisions regarding the estate. Not land, not labor, not law. Everything passes through the council." "Agreed." "Second," she went on, "you will account for your absence, not to me alone, but to those who suffered because of it." His jaw clenched. "Publicly." "Yes." "And third," she finished, "you will not ask for trust. You will accept that it may never return." The words hung heavy between them. Roderick inhaled, slow and measured. If that is the cost of standing beside you again, then I will pay it. Something shifted then. Not forgiveness, not peace, but the faintest easing of tension. A door cracked, not opened. "Why now?" she asked quietly. "Why return at all?" He hesitated. "Because I nearly died believing I was indispensable." A bitter smile touched his lips. "And then I learned the world moves on. That you moved on." Her throat tightened, unbidden. "I didn't want to," she said. "I had no choice. I see that now." Silence settled again, but it no longer pressed like a weapon. Felt cautious, testing. "You may stay," she said at last. "As a guest." Relief flickered across his face, quickly mastered, but not entirely hidden. "Thank you. This is not mercy," she added. "It is observation. I would expect nothing less." As he turned to leave, he paused at the door. "Eilidh." She did not respond immediately. "When you're ready," he said, "I will tell you everything. No omissions. No justifications." She met his gaze one final time. "Be careful," she said. "Truth has consequences." "So does silence," he replied softly and left. Eilidh remained by the hearth long after the door closed, her reflection wavering in the firelight. Her heart felt bruised, not reopened, but pressed. Wary curiosity stirred beneath the old hurt, unwelcome and persistent. She had demanded proof. Now she would see whether he was capable of becoming the man his apology claimed to be. The letter arrived at dawn, borne by a rider whose horse was lathered with sweat and whose expression carried the practiced neutrality of one accustomed to delivering unwelcome truths. Eilidh was already awake. She had learned, over years of vigilance, that peace rarely announced itself early. The estate stirred beyond her window, hens clucking, a cart creaking toward the lower fields, the low murmur of voices as tenants began their day. Dunereid breathed because she willed it so. Every morning reaffirmed that fragile miracle. Mrs. Elspeth Gow intercepted the rider at the gate and brought the message herself, her usually brisk steps slowed by unease. "It bears the Strathmore seal," she said quietly, offering the letter as though it might bite. Eilidh felt a chill before she even touched it. Strathmore. She dismissed Elspeth with a nod and broke the seal alone in the solar, the early light spilling across the table where she had once taught children their letters while grain tallies dried beside her inkpot. The parchment was thick, expensive, its script elegant to the point of arrogance. "Lady Eilidh McCrae, it is with due respect to blood and precedent that I inform you of my intent to formally assert my claim to the earldom of Dunereid and all lands thereto appertaining." Her fingers tightened. Alastair Strathmore was not a surprise, but neither was he a ghost easily dismissed. Cousin by blood, twice removed, his lineage traced cleanly through the male line where hers did not. A man of courts and council chambers, of soft hands and sharpened ambition. He had never set foot on Dunereid while it starved. Never spoken when creditors circled. Never written when roofs caved and walls crumbled. Now, when the estate stood restored, now he remembered his inheritance. The letter continued, couched in courtesy and legality, invoking statutes, precedents, the Crown's favor. It concluded with an announcement of arrival within the fortnight, accompanied by legal representatives and witnesses. Eilidh folded the parchment with care, though her pulse hammered fiercely. "So," she murmured to the empty room, "the reckoning comes." By mid-morning the household knew, not because Eilidh allowed panic to spread, but because secrets of this magnitude seeped through stone and wood alike. Callum Innes, her steward, arrived with his jaw set hard, weathered face dark with concern. "Strathmore's a viper," he said without preamble. "He'll bleed the land dry if he takes it." "He'll try," Eilidh replied calmly. "Trying and succeeding are different matters." Callum studied her, then nodded, drawing strength from her steadiness. "The council should convene." "Yes," she said, and discreetly. They gathered in the great hall, a space that once echoed hollow and cold, now warmed by tapestries woven by local hands and long tables burnished by use. Farmers, tradesmen, and elders took their places beside ledgers and maps. This was no ceremonial council. It was a working body, forged in hardship. Eilidh stood at the head, her posture straight, voice even as she relayed the news. Murmurs rose immediately. "He has no right. He never lifted a finger. The law favors men like him." Eilidh raised her hand, and silence followed. "Strathmore has a claim," she said plainly. "Ignoring that would be foolish. But claims are not crowns, and paper does not plant fields." Her gaze swept the room. "We will meet him with facts, with records, with witnesses who can attest to stewardship, to continuity, to necessity." "And the crown?" asked one elder. "They favor clean lines. They favor stability," Eilidh countered. "And Dunaraid is stable because we made it so." The council dispersed with purpose, resolve hardening beneath fear. As they departed, Callum lingered. "And McCrae?" he asked quietly. "Does he know?" Eilidh's expression tightened. "He will," Roderick learned that evening. He had been in the lower fields, sleeves rolled, assisting with a collapsed irrigation trench, work he had taken up without instruction, to the quiet surprise of those who remembered him otherwise. Mud streaked his boots, and his expression darkened when he saw her waiting by the stone wall. "Strathmore," he said after she told him, the name sharp as a curse. "Of course. You know him," she said, watching him closely. "I know his kind," Roderick replied. "Men who believe inheritance is conquest by quieter means." "Then you understand why this changes nothing," she said. "I won't yield Dunaraid to a stranger who sees it as spoils." Roderick hesitated. "Legally, his claim carries weight." "And yours?" she asked coolly. He exhaled. "Complicated." "Everything with you is," she said, not unkindly but without softness. "This is my fight." "That's where you're wrong," he said, meeting her gaze. "Strathmore won't distinguish between you and me. He'll use my absence, my failures, as proof you were merely a caretaker." The word stung. "I was never merely anything," she said sharply. "I know," Roderick replied. "But he won't." Silence stretched. The wind tugged at her cloak, carrying the scent of earth and smoke. "I won't step aside," Roderick said finally. "Not to reclaim authority, but to stand as witness. To admit fault where I must, and affirm what you've done." She searched his face for duplicity, found only resolve tempered by humility. Still, trust did not come easily. "Do not turn this into a contest of pride," she warned. "If you undermine me—" "I won't," he said. "You have my word." She nodded once, then turned away. That night, sleep eluded her. Eilidh lay awake, staring at the beams overhead, listening to the estate breathe. Fear crept in, not of Strathmore himself, but of what he represented. The old world pressing back, insisting that effort mattered less than blood, that a woman's stewardship was provisional at best. She rose before dawn and walked the grounds alone, past the orchards she had replanted, the cottages rebuilt stone by stone. Faces came to mind, children she had taught, widows she had employed, men who had stayed when leaving would have been easier. This is my inheritance, she thought fiercely. Earned, not granted. The following days were consumed by preparation. Ledgers were copied, testimonies gathered. The council rehearsed arguments not for eloquence, but for truth. Even the tenants sensed the tension, their greetings edged with concern. Strathmore's arrival was announced by polished carriages and liveried men, their boots unsullied by mud. He stepped down in tailored finery, his smile smooth, eyes sharp and assessing as they swept the estate. Eilidh met him at the steps, flanked by Callum and Mrs. Elspeth. She did not curtsy. "Lady McCrae," Alastair Strathmore said warmly. "Or do you prefer mistress of the house?" "I prefer steward," she replied evenly. "One who has done the work you ignored." His smile thinned. Bold words from a woman occupying borrowed ground. "Borrowed things are returned and used," she said. "This land has been lived upon, repaired, defended." Roderick appeared then, stepping forward to stand beside her. Not ahead, not behind. Strathmore's brow lifted. "Ah, the prodigal." Roderick inclined his head. "The same. And the witness you won't enjoy hearing." The tension was palpable, the future of Duneraid poised between past entitlement and present resolve. Eilidh felt fear coil, but beneath it, something stronger took root. Whatever shadows inheritance cast, she would not surrender what she had built. Not without a fight. Roderick rose before the bell. It was not habit that woke him, but intention. Sharp, restless, and unyielding. The sky beyond the narrow window was still bruised with night, the first hint of dawn barely touching the eastern hills. He dressed without summons, without a servant's hand, pulling on plain wool and boots already scuffed from the days prior. The man who had once worn fine coats and left early labors to others now tied his own laces with deliberate care. Outside, Duneraid stirred. Smoke lifted from a handful of chimneys. Somewhere, a cock crowed, answered by another farther down the slope. The estate had a rhythm now, one Eilidh had forged through consistency and trust. Roderick felt himself stepping into that rhythm like a guest who knew he must not disrupt the music. He made his way to the byre first, where Callum Innes and two farmhands were already assessing a cracked beam. Callum looked up, surprise flickering across his weathered face. "You're early," the steward said. "So are you," Roderick replied simply. "What needs doing?" Callum studied him for a moment, weighing pride against practicality. Then he gestured toward the beam. "Storm last week weakened it. If it gives, we lose half the shelter." "Show me," Roderick said. "No speeches, no declarations." He took the mallet when it was handed to him, braced the timber with shoulders that remembered strength, and worked until sweat soaked through his shirt and his hands burned. When the beam finally held, secured with fresh supports, he stepped back without waiting for approval. By mid-morning, word had spread. Some watched from a distance, skepticism etched deep. Others were blunter. "You trying to buy forgiveness with sore muscles?" one man muttered as Roderick hauled stones for a boundary wall. Roderick paused, breathing hard. "No," he said evenly. "I'm trying to learn the cost of what I abandoned." The man snorted but said nothing more. From the upper path, Eilidh observed it all. She had not meant to linger, but something held her there. The sight of Roderick bent beneath work that did not glorify him. His movements awkward at times, his hands blistering. This was not performance meant for her alone. He did not glance up when he faltered, did not seek her reaction. Still, disbelief pressed hard against the fragile bud of hope she refused to name. Men learn quickly when it suits them, a voice within her warned, and forget just as fast. She turned away, setting her jaw, and immersed herself in her own duties. There were grain contracts to review, a dispute over grazing rights to settle, and a meeting with the weavers whose looms now supplied 3 villages. Work had always been her refuge, proof, if nothing else, that she endured. At midday she passed the fields again. Roderick was there, sleeves rolled, passing water-skins to laborers. He laughed at something Callum said. A sound rougher, less polished than she remembered. Startled her, that laugh. Once she had loved it. Once it had promised constancy. She hated herself for noticing. In the days that followed, labor became his language. He repaired fences, dug drainage trenches, sat with the women sorting seed and listened more than he spoke. When he erred, when he lifted wrong, measured poorly, he accepted correction without offense. Slowly, guarded glances softened into neutral ones, neutral into curious. He works like he means to stay, Mrs. Elspeth observed one evening as they walked the hall together. He works, Eilidh replied. Meaning comes later. Yet even she could not deny the shift. One afternoon, a cart overturned near the lower road, pinning a boy beneath it. Roderick was there before Eilidh, lifting wood and wheel with raw force until the child was free. He stayed long enough to bind the boy's ankle with his own kerchief, murmuring reassurance until the shaking stopped. When Eilidh arrived, breathless, Roderick stepped back, face pale, hands bloodied. "He'll walk," Roderick said quietly, "but keep him off it a week." She nodded, meeting his eyes. Something passed between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of shared concern, shared responsibility. That night, Eilidh lay awake again, troubled by a different fear. What if he means it? What if this is not an act? Hope, she had learned, was dangerous. It made losses sharper. On the 6th day, rain fell hard and sudden, turning paths to mud. Roderick worked through it anyway, helping secure tarps over stored grain. When the storm worsened, Eilidh went out herself, cloak pulled tight, anger flaring at his recklessness. "You don't prove devotion by courting illness," she snapped when she found him wrestling canvas in the wind. He looked up, rain streaming down his face. "I'm not proving anything," he said. "I'm preventing rot." She froze. The words were simple, practical, and achingly familiar. She had said the same thing once, years ago, when he had accused her of being too harsh with the estate accounts. They finished the task in silence, side by side, hands numb with cold. Later, by the hearth, servants passing quietly around them, Roderick finally spoke. "I know labor won't erase what I did." "No," Eilidh said, staring into the fire. "It won't. But it can tell you who I am now," he continued. "Better than apologies." She studied him then, not the title, not the memory, but the man before her. Tired, changed, still flawed. "I'm watching," she said at last. "Not to be convinced, but to see if you falter." "I will," he said without hesitation. "But I'll stand again." The honesty unsettled her more than any oath could have. As days turned into a fortnight, something subtle shifted within Dunedain. Roderick became a presence, not commanding, not central, but steady. And Eilidh, despite herself, felt the estate respond not with reverence, but with cautious acceptance. Tentative hope stirred, and she feared it almost as much as she wanted it to be real. The warning came on a wind sharpened by rain. Callum Innes crossed the courtyard at a pace that set Eilidh's nerves humming, his usually unhurried stride clipped and purposeful. Behind him, the gates of Dunedain stood open wider than custom allowed, iron creaking as a carriage rolled through, black lacquered, its crest unfamiliar yet unmistakably arrogant in its flourish. Eilidh did not need Callum to speak. She knew. Alasdair Strathmore descended first, boots gleaming despite the mud, cloak cut in the latest Edinburgh fashion. He wore confidence like a weapon, his smile thin and appraising as his gaze swept the estate. Fields, workers, stone walls repaired with care. A man trained to see assets before people. Behind him stepped another figure, older, spare, carrying a leather case clasped tight to his chest. A solicitor, of course. So, Alasdair said, spreading his arms as though greeting an audience rather than a home. This is what's become of my cousin's inheritance. Eilidh moved forward before Callum could intercept her, spine straight, expression carved from calm. Dunedain has been stewarded responsibly, she said. If you'd written before arriving, you'd have been told as much. Alasdair's eyes flicked to her, dismissive, measuring. You must be the widow. The word landed like a deliberate slight. My name is Eilidh McCrae, she replied evenly, and I have governed this estate for 7 years. Governed, he echoed, lips twitching. A generous term. Temporary arrangements often feel permanent to those enjoying them. Behind her, she felt movement. Roderick stepping closer, silent but present. She did not look at him. Not yet. Alasdair gestured to his companion. Mr. Haversham, my solicitor. We're here to discuss the inevitable correction of an irregular situation. Irregular. Callum barked despite himself. Haversham cleared his throat. The earldom, by strict interpretation of succession law, does not pass to a widow absent a male heir. The late Earl's cousin, he inclined his head toward Alasdair, has standing. Eilidh folded her hands. And yet the crown confirmed my stewardship. Taxes paid. Improvements documented. The estate thrives. Alasdair laughed softly. Thrives? You call this prosperity? He pointed toward the lower fields where new cottages stood modest, sturdy. You diverted noble resources to tenants, reduced rents, allowed shared grazing, philanthropy masquerading as governance. Her jaw tightened. I invested in people, and the returns speak for themselves. Sentiment, he said lightly, doesn't impress the law. Roderick stepped forward then. Careful, he said, voice low. You're standing in a place rebuilt by her hand. Alasdair's eyes sharpened. And you must be the prodigal earl, returned just in time to watch what should have been yours slip away. Roderick didn't rise to the bait. This estate is standing because she stayed when I didn't. Ah, Alasdair said. Guilt. How quaint. He turned back to Eilidh. You see, cousin, or whatever title you fancy, you've mistaken tolerance for legitimacy. I intend to reclaim Dunedain. Properly. The courtyard had gone quiet. Workers had slowed, ears keen despite their tasks. Eilidh felt their attention like weight on her shoulders. Not pressure, but trust. She would not squander it. You'll find, she said calmly, that Duneraid is no longer a hollow title waiting to be claimed. It is a living community. You cannot strip it bare without consequence. Alasdair smiled wider. Watch me. He motioned to Haversham, who opened his case and produced documents, seals glinting dully. Formal notice, the solicitor intoned. Pending review, control of revenues and appointments will transfer to Lord Strathmore. Eilidh took the papers without flinching. Her hands did not shake. You'll be challenged, she said. In council. In court. By whom? Alasdair asked. You. By me, Roderick said. If you intend to invoke blood, you'll answer to mine as well. Alasdair regarded him coolly. You forfeited your authority the moment you vanished. Authority, Roderick replied, isn't seized by arrival. It's earned. Silence stretched. The wind tugged at cloaks and banners alike. Alasdair inclined his head slightly, mockery barely veiled. Enjoy your delusions while they last. I'll be staying. Long enough to restore order. He turned and strode toward the house without waiting for permission. When the doors closed behind him, the courtyard seemed to exhale. Callum swore under his breath. Mrs. Elspeth crossed herself. Someone muttered, "Vulture." Eilidh stood still, papers heavy in her grasp. Roderick spoke softly. "He underestimated you. That makes him dangerous," she replied. Then quieter, "And so does the law." She met Roderick's gaze at last. There was no plea in her eyes, no expectation, only resolve and fear she refused to indulge. Duneraid had been built once by inheritance. It had been rebuilt by will, and she would not surrender it without a fight. The offer came not with ceremony, but with quiet. Eilidh found Roderick in the west solar just after dusk, the room washed in amber from a single hearth fire. The windows stood open to the hills, carrying the scent of peat and wet grass. He had dismissed the servants, even Callum, and now stood alone at the long table, a stack of documents laid out with unnerving precision. She knew before he spoke that something irreversible hovered between them. "You sent for me," she said, closing the door behind her. Roderick turned. He looked older in the firelight, lines etched by regret rather than years, but steadier too, as though he had finally chosen a direction and anchored himself to it. "I did," he replied, "because Alasdair won't wait, and neither will the law." Her fingers tightened around each other. "Then we fight him, publicly, thoroughly." A faint smile touched his mouth. "That would cost you everything you've built." She bristled. "I didn't build Duneraid to abandon it at the first threat." "No," he said gently. "You built it to last. That's why I won't let my name be the reason it falls." He gestured to the table. "Sit, Eilidh, please." Reluctantly, she did. The papers were dense, legal language, seals, annotations in a firm, decisive hand. She recognized the crown watermark on one parchment and felt a flicker of unease. "What is this?" she asked. Roderick didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took the seat opposite her, forearms resting on the table, gaze unwavering. "I'm stepping aside." The words struck like a physical blow. "You what?" "I will formally cede the title," he said, each syllable deliberate. "Renounce claim to the earldom. Transfer stewardship, authority, and revenue rights to you by contract, not custom. Recognized by crown and council." Eilidh stared at him, the room suddenly too small, too quiet. That's not possible, she said. Titles aren't discarded like cloaks. They are when the man wearing them chooses to lay them down, he replied. Especially when he's already half a ghost to the law. Her breath came shallow. Roderick, if you do this, you'll have nothing. No name. No protection. I'll have Duneraid standing, he said simply, in the hands of the person who saved it. She pushed back her chair and stood, pacing once, twice, as if movement might dislodge the weight pressing on her chest. You think this absolves you? She demanded. That you can vanish again, this time legally, and call it justice? His jaw tightened. I'm not vanishing. You're erasing yourself. I'm choosing, he said. For the first time. She stopped, turning on him. Do you have any idea what this costs you? What a last dare will do once you're stripped of rank? Roderick rose as well. Let him try. Without my title, he has no rival to provoke, no legitimacy to parade. And without his claim, he has nothing. Eilidh shook her head, disbelief warring with something dangerously close to relief. You'd make me countess in all but name, she whispered. Put a target on my back. You already carry one, he said softly. You always have. The difference is this gives you armor. Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken truths. And the price? She asked at last. Roderick's eyes flickered, not away, but inward. There is one condition. Her heart sank. Of course there is. Marriage, he said. The word hung, fragile and heavy all at once. Not as obligation, he added quickly. Not as penance, but as protection. The law moves faster when it sees unity. A steward with a husband, especially one who relinquished power to her, disarms half its objections. Eilidh laughed once, sharp and breathless. So I trade one chain for another? No, he said firmly. You gain leverage, and I give up the last illusion of control. She looked at him then, really looked. The man who had once ridden away from this estate, leaving silence and grief in his wake. The man who now stood before her, offering his name like a shield he no longer wished to carry. And if I refuse? She asked. Then I still cede the title, he replied without hesitation. This isn't a bargain. It's an offer. Her throat tightened painfully. You do this? She murmured. Even if it leaves you lesser. Roderick shook his head. I was never lesser than my title. And neither are you. Emotion surged, hot, unbidden, terrifying. Relief bloomed first, swift and intoxicating, followed immediately by fear sharp enough to steady her. What if this destroys you? She asked. What if the world punishes you for it? Then let it, he said. I've spent years running from consequence. I won't run from this. Eilidh sank back into her chair, hands trembling now despite her effort. She pressed her palms flat against the documents, grounding herself. This secures the estate, she said slowly. The tenants, the school, the mills. Yes. And Alasdair becomes what he always was, Roderick replied. A man with ambition and no foothold. She closed her eyes. For 7 years, she had fought alone, against decay, against doubt, against the quiet terror of losing everything she'd rebuilt. And now, with a few strokes of ink, it could all be safe. Too safe. What scares me, she said quietly, is not the power you're giving me, it's the trust. Roderick reached across the table, not touching, but close enough that she felt the warmth of him. I know, he said, and I will accept whatever answer you give. Eilidh opened her eyes. In them relief still glimmered, but now it stood beside resolve. I won't accept your sacrifice blindly, she said. If we do this, it's not absolution. It's partnership. Transparent. Equal. A slow, genuine smile crossed his face. That's all I want. She exhaled, long and unsteady. Then leave the papers, she said. I'll read every word, and tomorrow we decide. Roderick inclined his head. As you wish. As he turned toward the door, Eilidh watched him go, not as the earl who once fled, but as a man who had finally chosen to stay, even if it meant standing beside her without a crown. And for the first time since his return, the future felt both terrifying and possible. The great hall of Strathmore House had not felt this still in decades. Even the fire seemed to hesitate, its flames whispering rather than roaring, as if the house itself were listening. Eilidh stood near the long oak table, her hands folded tightly before her, feeling the weight of every stone in the ancient walls press inward. This was the room where generations of earls had ruled, where judgments were made and futures altered with ink and seal. Today it would witness something rarer, sacrifice freely given. Alasdair Strathmore occupied the high-backed chair at the table's head. His posture relaxed to the point of arrogance. His solicitor, Mr. Haversham, sat beside him, parchment neatly stacked, quill already inked. Confidence radiated from them both. This was meant to be a formality, a victory. Roderick stood opposite, hands clasped behind his back, gaze steady but unreadable. Gone was the restless energy that had followed him since his return. In its place was something quieter, heavier. Resolve. Eilidh watched him closely, her chest tight. She had agreed to this meeting knowing the stakes, yet part of her still rebelled against them. Titles were not merely words. They were identity, legacy, birthright. And Roderick was prepared to lay his down as if it were nothing more than a coat shrugged from his shoulders. Alasdair broke the silence with a thin smile. "Shall we conclude this tiresome business?" he said. "I have no wish to linger in a house run like a tenants' cooperative." Eilidh flinched, but said nothing. Haversham cleared his throat. "The terms are straightforward. Lord Roderick Strathmore will formally renounce all claim to the earldom and its associated lands. In return, Lady Eilidh McCrae is to be appointed permanent steward of the estate, with full authority over operations, tenants, and revenues, subject to one condition." Roderick's jaw tightened. "State it." Alasdair leaned forward, fingers steepled. "That the stewardship remains just that, stewardship. No elevation, no title. Should Lady Eilidh marry or fail to produce a direct heir loyal to the Strathmore line, the estate reverts to me or my descendants." The words struck like a blade. Eilidh's breath caught. It was a trap disguised as generosity, a leash, not freedom. She opened her mouth to object, but Roderick spoke first. "No," he said calmly. Alasdair blinked. "No, no," Roderick repeated. "You will remove the marriage clause. Eilidh's worth does not hinge on who she weds or whether she chooses to bear children. Nor will her life's work be held hostage to your bloodline obsession." The room tightened. Haversham shifted uneasily. Alasdair's smile hardened. "Then there is no deal." Roderick turned to Eilidh then, fully, and for a moment the hall disappeared. There was only her, the woman who had rebuilt what he had abandoned, who had turned neglect into nourishment, fear into purpose. "I will not sign away my name only to see you threatened by it later," he said softly. "If that means walking away, I will." Her eyes burned. "Roderick!" He lifted a hand, gentle but firm. "Let me finish this." Silence stretched until it became unbearable. At last, Alasdair exhaled sharply, irritation cracking his composure. "You are an infuriating man," he muttered. Then louder, "Very well. Remove the clause. But add this instead. Lady Eilidh's stewardship shall be irrevocable only while the estate remains profitable and unrest-free. Any significant decline, and I reserve the right to contest." Eilidh's heart pounded. It was unfair but survivable, and Alasdair knew it. She looked to Roderick, shaking her head. "Don't. This isn't yours to give." "It is," he said quietly, "because I took it once without earning it." Haversham slid the revised document across the table. "Shall we proceed?" Roderick did not sit. He stepped forward, took the quill, and paused. This was the moment. Memories flickered across his face. Boyhood lessons, ancestral portraits, a name spoken with expectation rather than affection. He thought of who he had been when he left, and who he had become kneeling in the mud beside tenants, blistered and humbled. He thought of Eilidh standing in the rain, directing repairs with fierce clarity, loving this land without needing it to crown her. He signed. The scratch of quill against parchment echoed like a gunshot. Alasdair leaned back, satisfaction curling his lips as he added his own signature. "Done," he said. "Strathmore is mine." Roderick set the quill down carefully, as though placing something to rest. "No," he replied. "The title is yours. The land belongs to those who serve it." Haversham sealed the documents. The deed was complete. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Eilidh felt it. A rush so sudden it stole her breath. Relief crashed through her, fierce and overwhelming, followed immediately by fear. He had done it. He had given up everything. She crossed the room before she realized she was moving. "Why?" she whispered, stopping inches from him. "You didn't have to destroy yourself for this." Roderick smiled, not triumphant, not proud, but free. "I didn't destroy anything," he said. "I chose." Her voice broke. "And what if I fail?" "Then we fail," he said simply. "Together, without titles between us." The fire crackled louder now, as if the house had exhaled at last. Alasdair stood, adjusting his coat. "Enjoy your victory," he said coolly. "Stewards rise and fall. Earls endure." He left without another glance. When the doors closed, the silence felt different, lighter, charged with something new. Eilidh laughed softly, a sound edged with disbelief and tears. "You signed away your rank like it was nothing." Roderick reached for her hand, tentative. "It was never nothing," he said. "It just wasn't everything." Her fingers tightened around his. Outside, the wind swept across the hills, carrying change through every valley and stone. Nothing remained as it was. Love had rewritten legacy, and sacrifice had redrawn the future. And for the first time, the estate was not inherited. It was chosen. 2 years later, the hills woke before the house. Mist drifted low over the heather, pale as breath, curling around the stones and sheep paths as dawn eased itself into the valley. Strathmore no longer rose to meet the morning with the severity of an old noble seat. It breathed now, chimney smoke soft and familiar, shutters opening not by command but by habit, by hands that belonged. Eilidh stood at the edge of the upper field, boots damp with dew, shawl wrapped loosely around her shoulders. The land spread before her in quiet abundance. Grazing sheep, barley bending in the breeze, the distant glint of the river catching first light. It was not perfect. Roofs still needed mending, Yield still depended on weather and mercy. But it was alive. Behind her, footsteps approached, unhurried, known. "You'll catch cold standing there," Roderick said, not as a reprimand but as an offering. She smiled without turning. "You said that yesterday, and the day before, and I was right both times." He came to stand beside her, handing her a chipped mug of tea, steam rising between them. They did not reach for each other immediately. They had learned not to rush the spaces between moments. What they had now was not hunger. It was steadiness. Roderick looked different these days. Leaner, sun-browned, his hands permanently marked by work. The sharp edges of his former rank had softened into something truer. No one bowed when he passed. They nodded. They greeted him by name. Some still called him my lord out of habit, but most had learned better, and so had he. Below them, Callum Innes directed a small team repairing a stone wall, his voice carrying faintly on the breeze. Mrs. Gow would already be awake, no doubt rearranging the kitchen despite having done so 1,000 times before. The estate moved like a well-worn clock, not flawless, but faithful. "It's lambing season again," Roderick said. "Callum thinks we'll need the west shed expanded." Eilidh nodded, already considering costs, manpower, timing. "We can use last year's surplus. If we stagger the work, it won't strain the hands." He watched her with quiet admiration. Not the dazzled kind he once mistook for love, but the kind that rooted itself deep and stayed. She had grown into this role fully now, not as a steward proving herself, but as a woman entirely at home in her authority. "You always think 3 steps ahead," he said. "And you always worry about today," she replied gently. "We balance." That had become their unspoken truth. They walked back toward the house together, fingers brushing occasionally, never grasping unless the moment called for it. Their affection lived in small things now, shared glances across a crowded table, arguments that ended in understanding rather than silence, the comfort of knowing the other would still be there when the day ended badly. They had not rushed marriage. They had spoken of it carefully, honestly, without pressure. No bargains. No sacrifices disguised as romance. When Roderick had asked her, really asked, one quiet night by the fire, it had not been with a ring or a promise of protection. "Would you choose me?" he had said. "If I had nothing else to offer but myself?" She had answered without hesitation. "I already have." Inside the house, sunlight spilled across the worn floors. The great hall felt warmer now, less echoing. The portraits still hung on the walls, but they no longer ruled the space. They were history, not expectation. Eilidh paused near the table where the old contracts had once been signed, the place where futures were bartered. She rested her hand on the wood, thoughtful. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. Roderick knew what she meant. He always did. "No," he said. "I regret the years before it, but not the choice." She turned to him then, really looking. "You're certain?" He smiled. "I wake every day knowing exactly who I am. That certainty is worth more than any title." Outside, the sun rose fully now, burning away the last of the mist. Heather blazed purple across the hills, resilient and unassuming, thriving where nothing else would. Eilidh felt something settle in her chest, a peace she had never known in her youth, when survival had been the only goal. They planned their future the way they planned everything now, plainly. A smaller house on the edge of the estate, closer to the fields. More apprentices taken on from neighboring villages. Perhaps children, perhaps not, spoken of with openness, never assumption. Travel someday when the land could spare them, or maybe not far at all. Whatever came, it would be chosen. As they stepped out together into the morning, The bells from the distant chapel rang, soft, unceremonious. Another day beginning, another promise kept without being spoken. Their love had not arrived like a storm. It had grown like heather, slow, stubborn, and enduring. And in that quiet dawn, with the land awake around them, Eilidh knew this joy had been earned, not claimed, not inherited, built together